at how cattle culture is really dominant in this whole region. And so what we've got here is a rhyton, a bull-headed rhyton. And basically this is a glass. And you may be wondering how, but back here in the neck, this is where the liquid would come out. So you would hold it upside down until you're ready to pour it out. So it could be for drinking, but it could also be for libation. Libations are sacrificial offerings that are poured out. So it might be something like beer that gets poured out, or wine, or oil. It might also be blood. And we've got some evidence on the material culture of ancient Crete that there was kind of bull's blood being collected. Kind of small etchings that were made that would show kind of bulls having a container under their neck seeming to be collected, and then that material would be shown in another scene with someone carrying it. So seeming to indicate, yes, they're taking blood. So blood might have been what was being offered. We don't know. One of the things I want you to notice is we have some degree of naturalism on this bull. Its ears are a little bit more naturalistic, maybe a little bit on the small side. Its eyes are pretty naturalistic. The curls are somewhat stylized, but they're random enough to show us that they're thinking about how curls don't have to be made like in a grid fashion. This is inlay right here, and the eyes are also inlay. So bulls were exceptionally important, and wild cattle seem to have been important. So a lot of times we think from the material culture, the representation of cattle, that basically they are roaming over the hillsides of Crete, and then they're periodically gathered and brought in. So it's not clear that they're milking these cattle. They're more for probably eating, and also for oxen, for pulling plows, etc. So in the palace that we talked about last time, broken into pieces was this figure. She was buried in a little pit. There was another figure with her. And she's kind of interesting. She's called a snake goddess because that archaeologist Evans from 1904 put her back together. And he had an idea of what she should look like in his mind. Now he was, as almost all archaeologists at the time were, they're trained in Europe. A precious few are trained in the United States at that point. So almost all of them are European, and so they're deeply immersed in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. So he knows a ton of the myths, and he knows that one of the myths is about the god Dionysus. And the god Dionysus came from Crete, and he would die each year in a cave in Crete and then come back to life. He's a god of agriculture. So it's the winter season causing the death of the plants, causing the death of Dionysus, and then in the spring comes back to life and starts the cycle all over again. And Dionysus was associated with snakes. Now you know he's also, most of you I bet, know he's also associated with wine and therefore growing grapes. And when you first plant a grapevine and it starts to grow, it tends to grow out these almost snake-like curls. And then as it's like hooking itself onto whatever it's climbing up, it's got these lovely tendrils that spiral around and lock into things. And we think maybe that's the connection with snakes. But there's another connection with snakes that might be relevant. And that is that snakes can hibernate in the ground. And then when they come out first in the spring as it warms up, their heads are coming out kind of like this. They're testing out the temperature and whether it's safe. And it's like a little seedling sprouting. So there could be a connection to agriculture that way, and therefore to Dionysus. Now, he's got all of this in his mind when he finds these broken figures, and they're only about this big. And they find these little figures right here. And they kind of look like snakes, this one especially. So they decided, well, where would these snakes be on these broken figures? And when they put them back together, they decided that they would go in the hands. Now, the arms were broken, so they had to put those together too. So there was a lot of guesswork that was going on, and that probably would have worked out okay if those were the only broken pieces of ceramic stuff in this little pit, but it wasn't. So there's other stuff in there. So we're pretty sure that the cat that is on her head doesn't belong on her head. If you look at it, it kind of just doesn't look like it has a place to be. If you work with clay, you know, if you're going to put one kind of piece of clay on another and have it look kind of separate to be, say, a cat on a woman's head, you're going to have to fasten it down and press the clay down, and it's going to push down into that area. It's going to spread out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't see that there. Now, its back leg is broken, but we don't see anything on her head that shows something was attached up there. So we think this is wishful thinking on the part of the archaeologist, but it sure makes her interesting.
Yes.
Now, why did he do something like that? Why would he guess like that? Well, it was just much more common at the time. They didn't have the same kind of scientific processes for kind of reassembling things that we have been using for the last 50 years. The other thing that I've gotten him is he was well aware of some other myths about ancient Crete. I bet you guys know some of them. So there's Demeter and Persephone. And Demeter is kind of the summer, the period of the growth of the crops and the harvest. And Persephone, her daughter, is Spring, who comes to life periodically. She's carried away by Hades. Half of the year she lives in the afterworld, and then she comes back as kind of an agricultural metaphor. And there are actually lots of female deities associated with Crete and Minoan culture. So maybe these had to do with this. It's also been suggested, well, maybe they were priestesses to these goddesses. And maybe that's what's going on with the snake. I'll be honest, we have no idea. We just don't. We would love to have an idea. But we can use this sculpture to try to understand something about women and about the culture of the time. And so one of the things that I think is vividly obvious is her bust.
Mm-hmm.
It's not contained by anything. And in our culture, it seems kind of weird to have your clothes on and then just leave that out. I mean, we wouldn't do that. But they did. Now, what's kind of interesting is they did seem to have in their material culture on some buttons and little things like that, a fascination with the idea of the breast, the circle with the dot in it, which is the breast with the nipple, and also nursing. And that also makes sense because that's kind of how you keep little kids alive. I think I've already told you guys that in a lot of nomadic cultures, women would nurse their kids until they're about 4. And they're nursing them enough that that disrupts their menstrual cycles so that they're not particularly fertile and able to have other kids. And it limits the number of babies you're going to have in an environment that is very fraught. So maybe this is about nurturing life and protecting it. Don't know, but we do know, wow, that waist is incredibly unrealistic looking. And it's cinched in. We can see that the clothing that she's wearing is highly elaborate. And we can also see that she's wearing multiple pieces of clothing. This is a girdle that goes over the top of it. It's kind of like an apron. And then she has this multi-tiered skirt. And the multi-tiered skirt is almost patchwork in the way that it's designed. And the whole thing is made out of faience, F-A-I-E-N-C-E. And faience is that pre-glass material that they were using in ancient Egypt as well. So write that down. So it's ceramic-like, but when they would fire it, it would come out shiny and it would have colors. Yes?
Can you spell it again?
F-A-I-E-N-C-E. And so that is also intriguing to us. So we have to banish the idea that the snakes and the cat belong, and we're left with her. Her eyes are pretty big, they're pretty open. She really looks like she's concentrating on whatever she's doing. Okay, they loved to make jewelry. And check this out. So we've got lost wax casting being used here. And we've got this pendant with these owls down here. Now, interestingly, one of the deities that's associated with Crete is associated with owls, and that is Athena. And so Athena, that Greek goddess of war and wisdom, is associated with an owl, which is why we associate owls with wisdom. We've got cute little owls there. And then look up here. This is kind of interesting. So we are looking at an example of symmetrical design right here. So if I were to come over here and block out this side, what do you see?
A dog?
Kind of a dog-like shape. Is that right here?
Yeah.
Yeah, we got that.
On top of the person.
On top of a person.
Mm.
Here's their head and eye. Their elbows are on their knees, and they're holding something up to their mouth. They might be eating something. They might be playing a musical instrument. And we've got this, and we don't have enough information to guess what that is. And so we have this bead right here, and notice it's made out of the same material as these beads. It looks suspiciously like one of those columns from the light wells at Gnosa. Is it? We don't know, but it's interesting to think about it. So we might guess that this is associated with a goddess associated with owls. Now we come over to this one. We've got the same kind of design happening here with a symmetrical design. And so see if you can figure out what you're looking at.
Is it meant to be an insect of some kind?
There's an insect. Can you guys see it? There's two of them. Absolutely. So we've got one wasp-like creature over here. Here come its front legs. And it has this circle right here made up of little tiny dots. And we think that that is pollen. They're holding pollen together. And here's the other one helping to hold the pollen. Their eyes are right here. Here are their wings. They've got these decorations that hang down. And notice the pattern they're using is very similar on the eyes as down here. And then look up here. This is where the loop is, to put it on a cord or something to hang around your neck. Do you see anything there? So it makes a little cage. Do you see that? And inside the cage is a little ball, so it rattles. And it's a spider. Its legs making the cage.
Oh.
All right, so now we are going into the Palace of Gnosis. I know we already looked at it in the reconstruction video, but now we can take a look at some of the frescoes. One of the interesting things about these frescoes is you can always paint over a fresco. You just need a new layer of plaster. And so they've got different designs underneath them. So you can kind of go back in time and see what different eras of the palace looked like. And I want you to notice the subject matter of this one.
Dolphins?
We have dolphins, and what are these?
Fish.
We got fish. This one, tuna fish. One of the most popular things to eat at the time. And what is that kind of blackish gray stuff? Here and here and here and up at the top.
Coral?
Probably not coral, but that was a great guess. Seaweed.
Hmm.
So we've got this kind of stylized naturalism happening up here, this focus on nature and the environment. So like we saw with the gold, there's this kind of interest in the world around them, this animal world around them. We've got flowers over here, and before it was flowers, it was a spiral to create this design around the room. Okay, we've got another one. This is called one of the throne rooms, and it's been reconstructed, but it does have this kind of limestone chair in it that's attached to the wall, and then it has these benches all around it, and it seems to indicate that there's some kind of leader who's going to sit in the middle, whether it's a committee chair or it's a king. Hard to know. And I want you to notice we have these creatures all around it, and these plants. But we've got this really stylized, very simple design in terms of color going around. And so let's take a look. What kind of creatures are these? Anybody? Do you see the back of their body? What do you think the back of the body is? It's a lion. And let's look at the front of the body. So we've got a curved nose, but not a hook. So we know it's not one of the hunting birds. It's got lots of beautiful and curling feathers. So that suggests that it might be something like a pheasant.
Peacock.
What was that?
A peacock.
They don't have peacocks in this area, but they have other curly haired kind of seed and insect eating birds. And so what we have here is sort of like a griffin. And it's another example of what?
Human animal symbolism?
Yes, and what do we call that? When we have a creature made up of two different beings, what do we call that? Yes, but in our history, what do we call it?
Composite something.
Composite animal.
Oh, okay.
We got a composite animal right there. And we know animals power symbolism. Perfect for a throne room or a meeting room. Okay, remember I told you that they're able to store massive amounts of olive oil and wine? These are the containers they're storing them in. The really big ones are made in pieces on potter's wheels and then kind of seamed together, so made in kind of three parts to stick them together. It takes a huge amount of wood to fire the kiln for these really giant ones. And you're gonna have a really big kiln, probably going on the hillside, so that as heat rises, you can put more pots in the back. And I want you to notice they're decorated, they're extra sturdy, etc. So we can tell, hey, they either have a flourishing ceramics industry or they're buying them and bringing them in on the boats. Now, the thing about King Minos and the story I told you about Theseus is about how he's super powerful. He controls all of Greece, even though he's out here on an island. And he did that in part because he controlled the seas. And he was said to have like ships. And so this is a major trading culture. They're very, very interested in transporting things and doing exchanges for them. They're not growing that much because honestly, one of the problems that the islands and mainland Greece had to face was that it was hot and dry. And so sometimes you get water, I mean, you definitely get water, but they just don't have a lot. When you hear about the Mediterranean climate, this is what they're talking about. So I grew up in California, and in a good year, so this was before there were huge changes with climate change. In a good year, we got 12 whole inches of water. We can kind of get that in April and May, maybe just April, here in Kentucky. When I first went back east, which for me was Nebraska, I was like, oh, it's green. It's disturbingly green. There's green everywhere. How do people handle all the green? Now I don't notice it. All right, so one of the things that they did is they seem to have spread out. They weren't just trading with all these other places around them, including Egypt and mainland Greece and what we think of today is Syria, Palestine, Israel. They were actively expanding, and so they took over some of the islands and had political control there. And we see that because the art style is very, very similar. The building styles are very, very similar. And one of the places they went to was an island called Thera, which is today called Santorini. And Santorini was a volcanic island, and it blew up. And so here's a recreation showing these people rowing desperately away from Santorini. And it was a solid island. And now it has a nice big circle in the middle filled with water. So what's interesting about it, at this site called Akrotiri had a lot of buildings down by the coast, perfect for a ship culture and trading. And we see that they created the buildings that they've got here. And they're showing us a landscape back here with hills and trees. So we've got focus on nature. We've got deer running over here. They're being chased by a lion right here. And then we've got these ships, and we get to see details of what their ships look like. They have rowers, they have this guy who's acting as a rudderman, bigger ships coming in. We see the porpoises swimming in there. All of this got covered with a layer of volcanic ash, which preserved it. So, Akrotiri, the island of Thera, was basically lost around 1600 when this blew up. Now, there's been a lot of speculation over time that maybe Thera was supposed to be Atlantis, and we don't think so. There's been other speculation that there were some very low-lying trading ports in mainland Greece. And so mainland Greece is mainly kind of high up and a bit rocky. So whenever you had a low spot, there's often going to be a port there close to the water. And that with the flooding that would have happened with this, that maybe one of those kind of got washed away and sunk, and that it may not have been quite as elaborate as Plato thought when he described it, because he's doing it from the oral accounts that were still extant. We don't know for sure, but we can take a look at what it looks like now. Horrifying, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And it has a huge kind of protective covering over it so that if you go and visit, it's not going to continue to decay and break down. So you can take tours around it. And we have this scene right here. This is a Minoan woman picking saffron. And so one of the things they did seem to grow was saffron, which you plant as a bulb, and then it has a crocus. It's a crocus plant, and it makes like a flower. And in that flower are two little pistils, and that's the saffron. So each flower only makes two of those little strings, and then that's it. So you need a lot of them to get much flavor. So it's very precious and expensive. And check out her clothes. Does she remind you of anything we've looked at?
She has the multi-layered skirt.
She's got the tiered skirt in multicolors. Lots of layers right here. She's got what looks like that same kind of wide belted girdle going around. And we can't tell if her breasts stick out or not, but this does kind of look like skin. Notice that she has light colored skin, further indicating femininity. And we've got plants growing all around her, and this very stylized kind of land formation